Allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. First order of business, Kathy McDowell somewhere near Iceland. So we need a motion to excuse Councilmember McDowell.
So moved.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Motion to excuse Councilmember McDowell. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, council members excused. Move on to council reports. Councilmember Dorsey.
Oh, all right. Well, listen, I have, in the past week or so, we've had several staff briefings with Vicki and other staff. On the 14th, we had a budget meeting at 3 o'clock. Yesterday, there was a grand opening at Nita's, and then at 11 o'clock, we had another briefing. And on 6/20, I had another briefing with Vicki, Craig, and Gary at 11:30. That was also after Nita's. And then on the 23rd, I heard there's an ice cream social. I'm going to try to make that.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead.
Councilmember Nisco.
Let's see, we're going backwards. The 8th, I had a Lions Club meeting, and we had a briefing on the 9th. On Tuesday, the 14th, a Housing Coalition meeting and a budget update. On the 16th, staff briefing and music at the park. We had meetings with the city manager on Friday. And ribbon cutting for Anita's yesterday. And today, we had a special meeting and a meeting now.
Thank you. Councilmember Krantz.
Well, over the past 2 weeks, I've been attending several staff meetings. I'm on the Criminal Justice Board, and its meeting got canceled this month. I have been meeting with several of our local citizens, talking to them about many issues, and so that concludes my meeting schedules.
Thank you, sir. The last couple of weeks, I've been attending the normal briefings and the budget briefings, and that's been pretty slow on other meetings. And I'll pass on to Deputy Mayor
Thank you.
Peterson.
In addition to the staff briefings and budget briefing, also attended a luncheon last Friday. Peninsula Credit Union had a Kenyan credit union exchange and invited a few of the council members to attend that lunch. Today, of course, we had our special meeting, executive meeting, and now this evening's meeting.
Councilmember Schmidt.
Good evening. Outside of the weekly staff briefings, I also attended the EDC Executive Board meeting at Sierra Pacific at the mill downtown and got to tour the mill. And that was actually a really, really awesome thing to check out. I haven't actually been in the inner workings of it, and it was pretty cool. And then also attended the African Credit Union Exchange last Friday as well with Mayor Rogers and Deputy Mayor Peterson, and received a budget update last Tuesday, the 14th.
Thank you, sir.
And that concludes my council report.
Okay. Now's the time where we receive open public comment on issues, any issues affecting our citizens. Donna?
We have Mindy Allen. Stuck in the chair here. So this regards to the letter I gave to Chief Moody a couple weeks ago about Stephen Street, the problems we've been having up there. And hopefully I can read through my letter, my statement in 3 minutes. It says, we moved to Sheldon in 1986 for my husband's employment. In 1991, we bought our current home, and in 20 years ago, I started a sole proprietor business out of my home. So my point is, we are invested in the welfare of our neighborhood. I know our concerns I bring to the council tonight do not represent a unique microcosm in Shelton. But for us on the 2000 block of Stephen Street, it is our home, and hopefully ours pursuit of happiness for the future. So to ask tonight is to take a city nuisance property action against 2028 Stevens, which he purchased 4 years ago by Warren Getz. According to Washington State's RCW 7.8, Chapter 2, a nuisance property involves an unreasonable or unlawful use of property that results in material annoyance, inconvenience, discomfort, or damage to another person or to the public. Chapter 6 is about vehicles. Currently, one is abandoned in the backyard, and we're constantly having them park in front of our houses so they can go in and do their drug buys, which kind of makes us a little bit uneasy. Chapter 8 is unsightly maintenance in excessive amounts of rubbish, creating a fire or safety hazard. I've had called 3-4 times because they have a fire 6 feet from my cedar fence when there's a burn ban. There's a long history of continued drug use, buys. She gets to watch the drug buys from her house because she has a nice view. And number 10 is a compromised air quality due to the rubbish fires, which there's a big pile of rubbish in the backyard right now. I'm just waiting for somebody to light a match to it. Over there, moral nuisance is Chapter 11. Back to the drug activities, and if you have a copy of the letter, down the end of that paragraph, it references another activity. Chapter 12 is noise nuisance. Ongoing description is unreasonably disturbs or interferes with the peace, comfort, and repose of others. Our peace is interrupted by the arguments and vehicles arriving and leaving at all hours of the day. It's 20 feet from my bedroom window, and I haven't been able to sleep with my window open in 4 years. It upsets me, okay? Those are the avenues that must be taken on the part of the city so we can have peace on Stevens Street, so as the residents and the taxpayers are not the ones feeling like we are the ones caged, not the persons inflicting their illegal activities and nuisance activities on our peace.
Okay.
So that's peace.
Thank you very much, Mindy. And the full council's received a copy of your letter from the chief. So we will check with staff and the chief and see what's going on.
Yeah, 'cause we need something to happen up there.
I have 5 grandchildren at my home with me. My daughter lives with me. They can't go outside.
Thank you. Okay,
That's the only general public comment.
all right. Thank you for your comment. Thank you.
Yeah, she brought one up.
Patricia, you put that yours is about the C Street landfill. Did you want to talk about that now or when it comes up on the agenda?
I don't think it's
On the agenda today.
There's a contract.
It is, there's an amendment.
Oh, the aspect contract?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
We'll wait till the aspect contract relates to C Street landfill? All right. Okay, so we'll move on to the consent agenda. Are we ready for the reading of the consent agenda?
Yes.
Okay. Donna, could you please read the consent agenda?
Voucher numbered 18305 in the amount of $9,640.45. Vouchers numbered 18318 through 18415 in the amount of $1,115,696.32.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as read?
I move to approve the consent agenda as read.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion to move, and second to approve this consent agenda as read. All those,
Okay. At this point, I just have a question. So after, right, at
Yes,
this
sir.
point, I would have a question. Is that okay?
on the consent
Yeah,
agenda?
after the first and the second, that's when there's any discussion.
I don't think discussion
Is that a comment?
on the consent agenda?
Did you have something on the consent agenda that,
I had a question about it.
okay.
that's okay. This would be, after the second, would be the time to talk.
Or we could remove something
We
from
could
the.
remove a single item from the consent agenda.
I just had some
And then-
question, maybe that can be answered. It's just a simple question.
Okay.
It's just, we have the Kitsap Sun, we have it looks like a bill here to Kitsap Sun for, if I'm correctly, $1,570. And I was curious what that item was about. Says the Kitsap Sun, is this a monthly prescription? 1,500 seemed awfully high, and I'm just trying to figure out what 1,500 would be. So, not trying to break protocol, but I'm just curious about that.
It wouldn't, I can't say for sure, but I would think that maybe we advertise some positions there. We're advertising 3 positions, and so it potentially is
That's
for
probably what it is. Yeah.
the posting of those positions.
All right.
But I can verify that.
Well, just seemed awful high. I knew that paper
Yeah.
subscriptions aren't usually that high, so I just
Okay.
had that question. I thought that was the time to bring it up.
Okay, so the motion is to approve the consent agenda as read. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda is passed. Next, Public Works Director Gregory is here to present the concept of Access Shelton.
Thanks, Mayor and council members. This is something that we have been working on for quite some time now. And with the recent projects that we have started and the overall concept and look at future projects, we have been fairly reactive to what we have been doing in the past, and we would like to be more proactive. And that is really where this was born from. And at this point, we would really just like to present this to the council, see if there is any adjustments or changes that the council would like to see in these projects, and then take a look at also the funding that would go along with these projects and the projections that we have moving forward for our overall transportation dollars spent over the next 5 years. So certainly feel free to stop me at any point and ask questions as we move along. One thing that we did leave out, you've got a site map on the first slide that shows all of the existing projects that we have going, some that have been completed, some emergency paving projects that we had last year, and then the current projects that are ongoing, and then the future projects. And one thing that we failed to include in the packet, we did provide each council member with one additional map, and also have copies of that out on the table at the entrance. But it is our federally classified routes. You can see all of those different colored routes on that map that are available for TIB or federal funding. So these are the roadways that we have to stick with when we're applying for TIB funding through the state. And if a street is not on that federally classified designated route, then it is not eligible, and it would come from our local funds to fix or improve those roadways. So just wanted to share that with you, and we do luckily have quite a few of those roads in Shelton. You can see that that map is populated very well with all of those different colors and all of those different routes that we have that are classified. So we started with Access Shelton Phase 1 and 2. Phase 1 being the Downtown Connector Project, Phase 2 being the Turner projects that are currently under construction. Actually, Turner just finished up here in the last couple of days and is completed and will be ready for closeout here shortly. And again, one of those projects that was an APP project through Department or Transportation Improvement Board that was 90% funded, 10% match for that roadway section that was approved by TIB last year. So moving on, the concept for Phase 3, moving forward into the upcoming years, would be Phase 3 of the Wallace Nealon Boulevard, and would include 2 roundabouts, Phase 3A and Phase 3B, with them being at Shelton Springs Road and also at the 4-way intersection at 13th and Wallace Nealon. Those were 2 that we took a look at and certainly feel in Public Works that there is a need for some additional traffic control up there. We've got an aging signal at Shelton Springs Road, and certainly much more traffic coming to that area with the addition of a full grade level being added up into that area, the potential of a YMCA, and also the future build-out that is happening right now in the Parsley Sage development just across from the high school that has quite a few building permits out and started construction of build-out up in that area. So quite a bit more traffic moving through that intersection. And then the 4-way stop has been it's been shown to have some major backups and delays through that, and is beginning to fail with no traffic regulation at this point and control up in that area. Especially when we get to the seasonal of Hiawatha up in that area in the October-November timeframe. We really see some backups and some failures in that area also.
Craig, do we have any idea how the ADT now in that area at Shelton Springs compares to what it did when the high school was 9 through 12? Are we seeing more students and more adults? I mean, it's been about, 10 or 15 years now. What the ADT is comparably, if we've seen an increase in what those numbers are?
That is something that SCJ Alliance is under contract to develop for us right now, and they are in the process of doing that. So as soon as that is done, we will be bringing that back to you. They did need some more information. With school being out and them starting this, we have agreed to wait until October, November timeframe, get all of those kids back into school, get some tube counts out there, and see what the actual activity is out there and get them some better information. So they are looking at that, and we will certainly be bringing that back to you as soon as they develop that and get that put together.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So Phase 3, A and B, would be the roundabouts, and you see both of those. Phase 4 is West Downtown Shelton, and basically that is from 7th Street heading west out to the city limits, and from Alder Street to Coda. So basically all of the West Downtown Shelton west of 7th Street, including all of the area around Evergreen School, and then moving out to the city limits out Railroad Avenue. And we also split this up into 3 different phases, A, B, and C. And the reason for doing that is really for funding. And the concept that we have come up with is through working with Steve Gorchester, former director of Transportation Improvement Board. We really came up with an overall look at what we could actually get funded and when we could. And what we came up with was an APP project, so basically just a pavement project every year, somewhere in the neighborhood of around $350,000 to $400,000 is normally where those come in and are funded, and then a major project every other year. So not getting funded in a major project every year, but having a better chance of getting one in the odd years, and then every year going after an APP project, which would just include pavement restoration. So that is what the direction we have been given or worked with Steve Gorchester, and that was the concept that we have been moving forward with, and we are trying to abide by. So Phase 4 did split into 3 different phases, or 3 different schedules. Schedule A is Railroad from 8th Street to the city limits. And we did put in a TIB application for this year, 2018, just last week. We will hear back from TIB in November on that. And we did actually submit 2 different applications, one for the roadway section, the APP project, and one also for a sidewalk project, which would include new sidewalks, 8-foot sidewalks on both sides of Railroad Avenue from 8th to 12th, and then on only the south side of Railroad from 12th to the city limits, which is Pacific Court. An 8-foot sidewalk on that south side of Railroad Avenue. So we are hopeful that both of those will go through, but we do have those applications in now.
If that does go through, will we be working with Mason Transit possibly to get a bus stop out there?
We absolutely will continue that partnership with
All right.
all of our local agencies, including Mason Transit, and they have been very easy to work with,
Yeah.
and we appreciate that. And I think they appreciate the level of service that they can provide also with those improved stops and not having those in-lane stops. So we will certainly
Right.
continue
That's
to
kind
work
of
with them.
dangerous right out there with a lot of single women and children get on that bus right there. There's no,
Yeah, and
no, no place to get off, really. It's just in the grass.
We have a lot of pedestrian traffic also that just use the road shoulder
Yeah.
right now to try and get in from Pacific Court into 12th Street, where sidewalks, may it be not very good sidewalks, start at 12th Street. So we're hoping to get those pedestrians off of the roadway shoulder and onto an actual sidewalk to get them into town. Phase 5, another, in an odd year, another APP project. It is Brockdale out from basically the four-way stop to Island Lake Drive. So basically right in front of Springfield development. That area is deteriorating fairly rapidly, especially out from Springfield out to the city limits. That project would also include, I don't know how many of you are aware that there is a sidewalk, a short stub of a sidewalk that goes about 200 feet on the east side of that roadway. So we would like to extend that sidewalk up that roadway up to Springfield Park and include that development so that we have some pedestrian facilities to get them into a walking path. We see a lot of residents out there that just run across the road in front of traffic to get over to the walking path. So this would give those kids walking to school and other citizens an avenue to get down to a crosswalk so that they could actually cross that roadway and get to a pedestrian facility to get to the schools and also into our retail area in the Mountain View area. And then phase 6 is a fairly big project. It is something that we have looked at for quite some time, that roadway on Olympic Highway North. It would be an extension from C Street, right now where downtown connector ends, up to K Street. And that would include new pavement and also the shortening the distance of those crosswalks up there now. So some bulb outs to shorten that distance across Olympic Highway North, which we have seen can be very difficult to move across. We only have sidewalks at every other intersection at this point. We would probably continue that concept just to keep the cost down somewhat and do bulb outs at every other intersection. But we did see a fatality up there recently with somebody crossing, be it not in a crosswalk, but still a fatality nevertheless. But also looking at an overall complete streets concept of landscaping, illumination, brighten that up. I know Public Works, I know Darren with the police department also has gotten quite a few calls about how dark it is up there, how dangerous it is. So hopefully we could get some illumination also up there with that project, but that will be a fairly large project similar to the downtown connector project. So this next slide gives you a fairly detailed timeline of what we would be looking at moving forward as far as design goes, applications, funding, and construction. So we have tried to map this out through the 2023 season, which would give us a 5-year look at what we are actually trying to accomplish, and also gives us a lot better direction on when we needed to start developing projects to get them through in a timely fashion so that we aren't scrambling and making last-minute decisions, and we can certainly get the public involved and get their opinions voiced so that we can develop a project that is the best for Shelton and its citizens. Any questions on that timeline?
Can you just talk a little bit, Craig, about how that dovetails with the residential paving and maintenance of existing roadways?
So within the next slide, we did put together a cost breakdown of kind of what we were looking at, some projections of the transportation dollars that we are anticipating having available over the next 5 years. And the concept would be to continue the 20 residential blocks, which this year ended up being just over $200,000. And we have budgeted within this to continue that. And we have just completed our road rating program, which we will be bringing back to the council here shortly. So we will be developing a list of all of those residential blocks from a priority, basically a priority breakdown over the next 5 years, also to go right along with this Access Shelton concept. So I don't know if that completely answered your question. But on to the next slide, kind of
Craig?
Moving, yes.
You mentioned the priority list, at least the inspection of the streets. Could that have a major impact on, say, the more residential streets that are in a condition that you really need to hit quickly, and you might want to move up that schedule? Or do you feel confident that $200,000 a year is going to hold?
I feel fairly confident in what we have been accomplishing lately with the residential blocks being paved. This year, we are getting almost $1 million in residential blocks being paved with the Basin 3 project. So just a few years back, when we did Basin 5, we also got a lot of the residential blocks in the north part of town, or in the south part of town, excuse me, paved. So I'm pretty sure that keeping with that consistent 20 blocks, and we did increase it. If you look at this cost breakdown into 2020, we did increase that to 250,000, just trying to take into account some inflation. But I think that 20 blocks, unless it is the council's recommendation or request to accelerate that and put some more money into residential blocks. But what we tried to stick by was the vote that we had from the former council, or former commission, sorry, that we did stick by the percentages for the transportation benefit district funds, that did divide those up into major projects, residential blocks, and also pedestrian facilities. So we tried to stick by that same concept. If that is something that we would like to discuss and possibly change to increase that, we certainly can do that.
No, that was my intent. It was just the question, if your inspection of streets comes back and say there's 40 blocks that are severely deteriorating and could use asphalting immediately, that might, you don't anticipate that.
Well, we do have quite a few blocks out there that residential blocks. I think everybody would say that their residential block could be paved tomorrow.
But you don't anticipate that your 20 block plan changes significantly based on the recent completed inspection?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. We had a pretty good grasp on where our roads were at as far as condition goes. I think this just really solidified where we were prioritizing those so that we can actually show the public where they're at on the list, how far out they are, so that we can point back to that list and say, you know, Jefferson Street might be 10th on the list and it gets done next year, as opposed to Madison Street maybe getting done in 2020.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
But, and then another part of this cost breakdown, and I will point out that we did take a fairly conservative look at funding. When it comes to this, we really just tried to look at TIB funding. This wouldn't really, we did have the major project of the phase the downtown, the Access Shelton Phase 4C, we are looking at a Safe Routes to Schools grant, which is a federal grant that is not eligible to be, it doesn't have an open grant period for another 2 years. So that is why we pushed that one out so far. But other than that federal grant, we only looked at TIB funds. That doesn't, this concept does not take into account any of the state transportation funds that we may get from our state elected officials, or any other commerce money that may come along with that, like the $1 million that we got for Downtown Connector. So this is a fairly conservative look at the overall funding concept that we are looking at.
Yes, well, when I read this, I put a 100+ % approval on it, because you have demonstrated by your leadership in obtaining grant funding to work it from many different angles, and that what it does, it puts the city in a proactive approach, and this is what we have done over the past 5 years to get over $16 million in grant funding and grant dollars. This is how small cities get their projects paid for, is having a vision, being proactive, and looking for multiple streams that you can obtain outside money to do these projects. So I'm a big supporter of your track record and approach in getting money this way for projects that we need, which then in turn eliminates the need to raise taxes on the citizens. Does that make sense?
It does, and thank you for that.
It does to me.
So one other aspect that we really wanted to point out from Public Works is the maintenance of our roadways. We have neglected most of our roadways for a very long time, even our newly paved roadways that are, let's say, 3 to 7 years old. And we just haven't done a lot of maintenance on those, whether that be a chip seal, a fog seal, something to keep the water out of the subgrade on those roads. We just have not accounted for that in the past. And with this concept, we have put $200,000 into that maintenance portion of those roadways. So we definitely want to maintain what we're actually putting out there and maintain what we've got. So any of those streets that can be chip sealed or fog sealed, much like Wallace Neelan Boulevard, it's not that old, but you can see that we already have some cracks in that, and we're starting to get some water into that subgrade, which is ultimately going to make that roadway fail. So we would like to maintain those as much as we can. So we did account for that over the next 5 years of spending about $1 million on maintenance of our roadways also. And then back to Councilmember Kranz's comments. You can see here that we are leveraging about $5 million of city funds. Overall potential grant funding of about $11 million. So getting about $16 million worth of projects for about $5 million of city funds over the next 5 years.
Or less.
Or less. Yes.
This is like piggybacking from our legislative agenda, correct?
It is.
Yes.
It certainly is, and that is one thing that we took a look at, and like I said, this didn't include any of our legislative asks that we are looking for. And I know one of those that we did have in there for this year into the next legislative season would be the Access Shelton Phase 3. So that did not take into account any of those funds, and certainly those would promote those projects if we got funding at the state level as match into the TBD funds. So anytime we can increase that match, that was one thing that really pushed us over the top with the Downtown Connector project, was we did go in with a 30% match, which was actually about $1 million. And then we did get our state elected officials to come through with about $1 million to match that, that we didn't have to spend city transportation funds on those match funds. But pushing that grant match up increases the number of points that you get with TIB when they're scoring these projects. And the more match that you have, the more points that you get, more likely you are to get funded. So
That's
certainly
great.
any of those are much appreciated from our state officials.
That's great. So I'd like to add in my 2 cents again about outside Oakland Bay Junior High, where the little flasher is, where it's very dangerous when kids cross that road. Now, there's a lot of kids coming from Mountain View, coming through the field and crossing that road, and not everybody stops. You might get one car to stop from one direction and not the other car, and then same with the parallel car next to them. The one car will stop, the other car won't stop, and I'd really like to see that in here also. as
And
well,
this
the legislative
doesn't-
agenda.
This certainly does not, to address that issue, this certainly is not something that is set in stone by any means whatsoever. Because we did look at one point, it's been within the last 6 or 8 months, we looked at an overall corridor project for Wallace Nealon Boulevard that would start at Olympic Highway North with that intersection that at this point is backing up and is starting to fail. That is a state-owned signal and intersection. But looking at an overall concept from there all the way out to the four-way stop, which would include likely roundabouts at every intersection, including that intersection into the school, which would slow traffic, but it would still continue to promote walkability and those more serious crashes and slow speeds, but continue to move traffic through those intersections. So that doesn't mean that somewhere down the line, we don't go after a very large federal grant, but it would have to be a very large federal grant, and likely it would have to be a partnership with the state, the county. It would be something of a larger scale. But it is something that we have kicked around and looked at in the future. I don't know that we're ready for it right now, but certainly in the years to come, that is something that we may take a look at in the future.
I'll just make one more comment. Craig, I know you said as far as local funding, this may be like the worst case or not very optimistic. It just, I would be concerned that if we went actually out there and every year we ran the TBD down to zero, which I think is what this does, it looks like it uses the, whatever comes in that year, you're using it for projects that year.
We are, with the consideration that we do have a fairly healthy in-fund balance at this point.
But isn't that all used up in 2018? The 1.3 million? All I'm saying is, it'd be nice to have a little bit in that TBD at the end of every year in case an opportunity came up, like you described, that needed a match that maybe wasn't on your list.
Correct. So,
And I know this is just a model out there in the future,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying that would be, based on this model only, that would be a concern of mine.
and that may be something that certainly the council could put within this, and certainly when we bring this back on September 4th, if that's something, just like we have with the general fund, if we have some sort of in-fund balance percentage that we want to keep in reserves, we certainly could take a look at that, whether that be 10%, whatever that might be. But if you, as the council, would like us to take a look at that and come back with some kind of, we could certainly work with Terry in the finance department and come up with a concept that had a strategic in-fund balance every year so that we weren't spending down that to zero. We certainly could bring that back to you.
Okay.
I'll
think I would
agree
agree
with
with
that,
that.
Mayor, as well. I think, just looking at the projections in general, I think in 2018-19, you're gonna see a little bit more of a fluctuation in the REIT and TIP arena with the building, and a continued sort of flat with TBD, from the excise tax perspective. But, just keeping in mind when we're doing our budget planning, coming up here to look and analyze those projections for the next 5 years or so, probably is a good idea to go through that with a fine tooth comb, so.
Yeah. And this is certainly, Mayor, I want to make sure you and the council, we are not asking you to rubber stamp something that we are going to move forward with over the next 5 years. This is really just a buy-off on a concept of this is the direction that we would like to move in. We still, any of those design contracts, any of those expenditures that we are going to have, we certainly know and realize that we are going to have to bring those back to the council for approval. So at any point, we can certainly make adjustments and slow this train down so that we are keeping some kind of strategic funds in there if the council does not feel comfortable with moving forward.
Any other questions for Craig? Okay, we have consensus, move this forward to the action agenda for our next meeting. All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, next, guess it's Director Gregory again to talk about residential paving contract.
So, on that same concept, we did just have a bid opening yesterday for our 20 residential blocks that we are going out for construction here in the next month or so. And we did have 5 bidders on those 20 residential blocks. They ranged from a high of $275,165 down to a low, which was Granite Construction, a very reputable, large construction paving outfit here in the local area, of $213,769.75. So they are our apparent low bidder. And we did, with having the bid opening yesterday, we did leave this briefing blank for you, and also just a blank contract that we will fill in and bring back to you on the 4th. So if you do have any questions about either the contract or the process, I certainly would be willing to answer any questions, knowing that we are just giving you a draft contract that we are going to fill in before the 4th.
Questions or comments? All right, consensus, move this forward to the action agenda? Yeah. Okay, thanks, Craig.
Thank you.
Okay, and next, we're going to have Interim Finance Director Terry Snitzer, who is going to present an ordinance for revising the 2018 budget.
Sandy.
Get away that. Thank you.
And she's accompanied by Sandy Hine.
Yes,
I
thank you.
should mention that.
She's the-
Sorry, Sandy.
So, thank you. So we're bringing this ordinance to you for the 2018 revised budget. As you know, that the city adopted a $2.4 million deficit, which $1.8 million of it was the general fund. So some history in the background of part of this budget. The year-end financial statements were not completed for 2016, but at the same time, the 2017 also needed to be completed. So because they needed to be done by May 29th, by state law, that it was decided with staff that we needed to hire a CPA firm to help move us forward in getting those 2016 and 2017 financials prepared and submitted to the Washington State Auditor's Office. Then, and also with that, the city management and the staff, we had concerns from the get-go, after I was short here, after in January, concerns regarding the adopted budget. And so and that was due to turnover in the key positions, the city manager, the finance director, and other key positions. But then we decided we needed to hire experienced financial analysts like Sandy Hines, and we also hired Bob Rogers, or, sorry, not Bob Rogers. I'm sorry.
Please don't start that rumor.
Bob Jean, sorry, Bob Jean to help move council and the budget forward. So, so during the year-end financials that the CPAs performed, it was discovered that that the 2016 storm drainage fund was over budget, and that could potentially give us a finding from the state auditor's office. It's just because it wasn't presented to commission at the time of the budget amendment for the storm drain fund. Also, in 2016, there was the Lake Boulevard project that was street and storm. And because that grant was over the $750,000 threshold, it triggers a single audit from the auditor's office. So we'll expect to be being audited for those grants. And we have received notice from the auditors that they will arrive at the end of August. I have not received a confirmed date yet, but I expect that to be soon. The 2018 budget was adopted on December 26th of 2017. That is late for a budget to be adopted, so would like to see that targeted for the first part of December. The adopted budget totaled $48.5 million, in which 16.1 million, or 33%, was the general fund. Concerns mostly centered in the general fund was the capital project budgets and budgeting of the loan payments of the water utility. That wasn't budgeted into the 2018. Other concerns in the general fund included the incorrect cost of living increases for employees that were not budgeted for some union and non-union personnel salaries, position titles, and distribution across department funds had not been updated. The health benefits and L&I and state retirement rates hadn't been updated for 2018. The beginning fund balance was significantly overstated. And we'll see that in the next slide. The revenue projections were not updated for 2018. If they were, there was very little that was done. And then the costs associated with the change of government from city council or commission to the city council, those were not budgeted either.
All right, just interject one little thing. So just for general information, so it seems to be there's quite a bit of stuff that kind of wasn't put in there. Whose fault was that? I mean, that's just a question because it wasn't your fault. You weren't here,
No, I wasn't here.
right? So,
But at the time, the finance director and the city manager should have been in control.
in control of those errors, I guess. Someone was.
I believe they are the ones that brought you the budget
Okay,
to adopt.
thank you.
So Terry, would it be fair to say that kind of the the two major issues that we're looking at here was having an incorrect stated ending fund balance and how that affected the budget, and another major impact was known but unbudgeted items, such as contracts that had been executed but not incorporated into the budget, et cetera. Is that a fair assessment?
Salaries were not adjusted accordingly, and retirement rates and cost, the deferred comp wasn't adjusted also.
Thank you.
So this slide shows you, what was the 2017 projected, what was the 2018 baseline and the 2018 requests. You can see that the adopted was 11.28 million in revenue, and the expenditures were 13.149. So that gives you the $1.8 million deficit in cash. So the revenue adjustments, the revenue projections were not updated in 2018 budget. And then the 2018 was based on current state shared rates, known contracts, expected development activity, historical trends, and the use of solid waste cash for the interfund changes or charges. So you could see that the tax revenue was up $451,000, which was good news. But then the charges for goods and services, because of the solid waste, was no longer available to that, was down, the 337. So it offsetted that, but we still had a total revenue of 152,000 increase of what the projected.
And the solid waste changed July of 2017, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
So Sandy's going to give you the information on the expenditures.
Okay. Good evening, council.
Good evening, Sandy.
So on the expenditure side, Terry's done a great job going through the revenue side. On the expenditure side, there was several adjustments needed, and they kind of fell into two buckets that we'll see a theme through the rest of this presentation, and it'll be something that council addresses as well as we go into the development of the 2019 budget, which is the difference between an ongoing versus a one-time expenditure. So ongoing expenditures tend to be for your ongoing services. So all of your personnel costs, your contracts, ongoing contracts for service, training, money to keep staff up to speed and in their expertise areas. And so those need to be funded by ongoing revenue sources, your property taxes, your sales taxes, your fees for service, for building and development that then fund the inspectors and the plan reviewers and such. And then you have one-time expenditures that aren't projected to continue. They doesn't mean that they'll only come up one time ever, but they're not a continuation from year to year. And so you might have temporary help to help with the situation. You might have equipment that gets purchased and then doesn't get replaced for another 10 years. So I mean, at that point, it's only a one-time expense. Or grant projects, that you receive a grant and you do that project with just that grant money and maybe some local city money. So those are funded then from your one-time resources, that grant for the project, available cash from your ending and beginning fund balances, maybe some offsetting expenditure savings. A department wants to maybe purchase some equipment, but they don't have the budget for it, but they know that they're not going to spend another line item. So they say, well, we'll save there so we can buy this equipment over here. So those kind of one-time in nature. And so this budget for 2018, when we looked at it, and there was a whole host of adjustments, some to recognize things that should have been budgeted in the adopted budget that had just not been included, such as the restructuring of the commission to the council, that a known item that we needed to account for. There was other adjustments that were for things that had kind of already happened that we needed to make sure were in the budget, some carryovers. So in the court, the Mason County had billed quite a few quarters of the 2017 jail costs in 2018, so it was hitting their 2018 budget, but really then you had that savings from 2017, so there's a carryover there that we'll talk about. And so a whole bunch of different adjustments, and then ongoing stuff that has been brought to council, council has given approval for and is now getting rolled into these adjustments. So on those ongoing adjustments, it includes the personnel budget that Terry had talked about, where the salaries, all the benefit rates, both health and welfare, as well as just kind of the state mandated, your retirement systems and your L&I and those things hadn't been updated. So we adjusted for those, and that's all ongoing. The addition of the salaries and benefits for the new council members. Addition of 2 new positions, a recreation coordinator, which is supported 60% by the SMPD. And then 40% by the general fund, and a new HR manager position to help deal with staffing issues and staff and HR issues. Increased funding for jail costs. We have a carryover, that was the one time, but on the ongoing side, Mason County also increased their jail rates. So that's going to be an impact going from year to year. Increased funding for credit card fees. We had been experiencing the credit card fees, and this is where the city pays a percentage and a rate based on when citizens use their credit cards to pay their utility bills, their permits, recreation classes, whatever it may be. When a person uses their credit card to pay a bill to the city, then the city pays a fee and on that. So we had been experiencing those, but the budget was just significantly understated, so we're making sure that that's up to date. And then increased funding, the prosecution contract was renegotiated, and that had an increase, so we had put that in. And then you have a lot of one-time adjustment adds. We did have some one-time kind of offsetting expenditure adjustments, but what I included so far here, just because the list is really long, it's included as one of your attachments. I just put kind of the adds of what council was adding money for, and then we'll get to how those kind of are funded in a minute. So you did have two carryovers. Street operations had a carryover, as well as I spoke about the jail costs, the $37,000 for invoices from 2017 that were paid in 2018. The CPA firm that Terry referenced to complete the 2016 and 17 year-end financials, the budget consultants, so myself and Bob Jean. And then with those staff departures, there was a lot of kind of backfill, and so you have people stepping up into additional roles, and with that then comes some out-of-class pay for them filling in at a higher level. We did have several retirements and separations, and so with that came some payouts. So we had a couple PERS 1, that's the state retirement system, public employee retirement system, PERS 1, and that comes with some additional costs when a PERS 1 employee retires. Additional attorney fees, we are seeing increased attorney costs. We did have our city attorney leave earlier this summer, I guess it was just a month or two ago, and so we are under contract again for city attorney services. Equipment and training for the new council members, recruitment costs to fill the city manager position, consultant fees to update the indirect cost allocation plan. That was not updated in 2017 for the 18 budget. So those indirect charges to the utilities and funds outside of the general fund, the revenue then comes to the general fund, and that was just rolled over from 17. So the model that drives all of those amounts was not updated. Our model is several years old. 2003, I believe, was the original year it was created, and the consultant has helped update it one time, but not necessarily the whole framework of it. And a lot of things have changed either within the city structure and framework, or just they've gotten better at building their models and they're more user-friendly now. And currently there isn't anyone left on staff here that has had experience with the old model, so we're having FCS Group as the consultant create an updated model for us. And then some temporary staff to help out with public records requests. Additional funding for the extra elections that we had this year. There was funding for 2 new police vehicles. Development is going well, so needing some building inspector services, so we have hiring some additional temporary help for that. And then adding a transfer to capital for design of some new projects, I believe some of related to the roundabouts that Mr. Gregory spoke about, so, and that funding. So kind of with that mix of adjustments, both ongoing and one time, and personnel versus equipment and all of that, you have kind of a mix of funding sources to then pay for those. So you have unencumbered beginning fund balance, which pays for your carryovers, because basically that is leftover cash from last year's budget that didn't get spent rolling forward. And since those carryovers were last year's expenses getting paid this year, we use that as the funding source for those. The personnel savings from several vacant positions is helping pay for the additional personnel costs, the step-ups, the retirements, the recruitment costs, those things. We have some cuts to other line items that the departments identified to help provide some savings. And then the Transportation Benefit District will provide funding for that capital transfer, the $120,000 that will come from the TBD money. Any questions on those? No?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, okay.
Can you clarify for us
Sure.
what carryover means?
Oh, absolutely. So carryover would, is a term just referencing that you have budget, usually non-personnel related, because you have your personnel budget set and they either work or they don't, and you don't necessarily keep those savings, that just you start a new personnel budget the next year. So carryovers would be for any supplies or services, equipment, contracts that were budgeted in one year and then either didn't get finished or didn't get paid for, and need to continue into the next year. So in essence, it's kind of carrying over the budget. So like with the jail, I think we had only paid 1/4 out of 4 last year. So the budget was underspent. And so what we say is we kind of carry over that budget and increase this year's budget to be able to pay for the costs that really belonged to last year.
Cool.
Does that
And
help?
did you guys determine if all the funds were paying their fair share of the credit card processing fees, or that was all coming out of general fund, or not yet?
Yeah, not yet.
No problem.
Okay, good.
But we will.
But we will look into it.
Yes.
fair and equitable taxation internally is what
Yeah.
we're talking about.
And that is due to a lot of citizens paying their utility bills on a credit card, so the utilities would pick up the cost of that fee for that
Instead of the general.
instead of the general fund.
Sandy, you mentioned legal fees. Are there any other expenditures that you or department heads came forward to say in the last 3 or 4 months are going to be significantly different than what we think are in the estimate?
I think, other than, obviously these adjustments that we're
Right,
doing,
but
but just the
beyond
ones
that.
that kind of seemed at risk was mostly related to legal fees and then the jail cost. Just with the increased, we do have money in here to increase the overall ongoing budget because of the rate increase, but that's set at a certain utilization amount. And if we end up having more people in beds and more jail time, then the cost could go up for that.
Thanks.
Am I on this one now? Okay. So I addressed, in the previous slide, I talked about how personnel savings. And so when we looked at kind of the personnel savings related to positions that had been vacated, city managers, a vacant position that currently finance director, and so several vacant positions for that. There was 1 or 2 positions that had been budgeted that didn't necessarily intend to be filled for this year, so we are also recapturing those savings as well. So the personnel savings ended up being about $800,000 across all of the vacant and unfilled positions. And so kind of the one-time personnel costs, when you look at the step-ups and the recruitment costs and the additional hired consultants and all of those things then totaled $400,000. So that left us still some savings from those vacant positions to then apply to other one-time costs and adjustments. And that can be done because it is all within the general fund. So the savings, even though it may come from a certain position in a department, we're kind of looking at this as a general fund overall to balance out for the year and not necessarily say, well, only that savings can be used for costs in that one department, since all of the general fund is supported by general purpose tax revenues. We're balancing to the bottom line of the fund. So that allowed for the other one-time costs to be funded from that remaining personnel savings after the personnel costs were directly funded. That kind of brings us, that's a little small, I know. This is just a summary then of the adopted versus the revised budget by department within the general fund. You can see the variance on the right, a lot of increases, a lot of decreases. And then overall, when you get down to the bottom, all the one-times, so the ongoing adjustments totaled about 456,000. And the one-time adjustments actually was a decrease of 571,000. And that's so large because there was a reduction in the transfers out right towards the bottom of that table. You'll see a variance of $1,064,000. So that was related to a capital project. The general fund was going to be transferring money to the capital fund, but we received other funding from TIB instead, and so we no longer need to do that transfer, so we're taking that out of the budget. And so even though there's other one-time adds, with that large decrease, it nets out to 571,000 of a decrease. So overall, the general fund budget went from a 13.149 million down to 13,034,000, so about 115,000 decrease in the general fund budget for this year. So I talked a little earlier about the difference between ongoing and one-time, and this is where kind of our ongoing, where that distinction really comes into play. So, so the portion of the deficit, sometimes there's a deficit that is planned. You may see a budget that does have expenditures over its revenue, and it's because it is planned use of cash. That maybe the city's been saving up for something and that hits that year and now we're gonna spend it and out of cash type of thing from a one-time project or equipment or something. So you might see a deficit planned. The way the budget was adopted with total revenue of 11.2 and expenditures at 13.1, it was a rather large deficit of 1.8 million. Now, within that, you have the use of the solid waste cash prepayment. And that is because with the prepayment, the revenues actually are lower. So that was that large decrease in the total charges and services. We were not receiving any revenue from the solid waste fund to pay for the internal charges. The prepayment from last year is basically kind of taking the place of that. So our revenue is understated compared to what it normally would have been because of that 500,000. So you kind of have to reduce that off the deficit because you do have that source. And then the carryovers would be coming out of the cash. So that would have given you an ongoing revenue to ongoing expenditure deficit of 1.2. So with our revised budget, our revised revenue of 11.4 and our revised expenditures of just over 13 million now, that would have brought our deficit down to a budgeted 1.6 million. Now within that 13 million, so within the 11.4 million of revenue, we still have that same use of the 500,000 of the cash prepayment. So really our revenue, you could say, would be 11.9, not 11.4, because we're supplementing cash instead of revenue coming from the solid waste fund. So that kind of brings off that deficit. You have the carryovers and then your one-time expenditure adjustments, because in that 13 million is the carryovers and the one-times. So it balloons up what your total budget is for this year. If you backed all those things off and got down to your ongoing service levels against your ongoing revenues, your planned looking forward deficit is around the 240 mark, 240,000. So it's still a deficit, adopted deficit, and knowing how revenues do grow slower than expenditures, we'll have to look at that going into 19, and that deficit would probably grow from a forecast standpoint, and we'll be talking to the council about that. But it does explain a lot better from a $1.6 million deficit down when you look at truly your ongoing versus your ongoing revenue to expenditures. Council have any questions regarding that? No? So we've talked about revenues, the changes there. We've talked about expenditures and what the adjustments were there, both ongoing and one time, and how that affects our deficit. The other piece of the puzzle then is your beginning fund balance coming into 2018. So in essence, your cash. So the beginning fund balance is usually estimated during the budget process. So in 2017, when the 2018 budget was being done, revenue estimates would have been done to say, how are we going to finish 17 for revenue? And expenditure estimates would have been done to say, how are we going to finish the year for expenditures? And then you kind of, you net all that out because you know where you start from, and then that would be your estimated beginning fund balance coming into this year. So we look at the estimates compared to the actuals for last year. The beginning fund balance is the same, no variance, because we knew what the beginning cash was. But the revenue estimates were at 12.7 million, but only 11.7 million actually came in revenue. And not so much that the revenue didn't come in. I think that there was maybe an error in the estimates of what was included. It was a little high. So, but that brings us down almost 1 million right there as far as resources coming in. And then on the expenditure side, just over 10.2 million was estimated to be spent, but 10.5 million ended up being the actual. So another 253,000 over budget, kind of going against our cash. And so instead of almost 4.9 million of beginning cash coming into 2018 that had been budgeted, we really only have 3.67 million coming in. So that's a difference of 1.2 million in cash that didn't necessarily disappear. It's just because it was estimated in the beginning, but then when you look at the truly actually what happened, that is the true picture then of where our cash and fund balance started the year.
You kind of already answered the question, but did you guys look into where in the revenue stream that shortfall did exist? Was it in one place or just kind of a spread across the board? Or?
We think part of it was related to the payment for the equipment for solid waste. That was at least 700,000, where it had been accounted for into the general fund as the estimates, but it really belongs in the solid waste fund.
So it's just housekeeping on books, basically. Okay.
Yeah. So now we take a look then our revised budget for the general fund. You can see in that variance column, there's that same 1.2 million in beginning cash that is beginning fund balance that's different. 152,000 increase in the revenue, and then the 115,000 decrease in the expenditures. So our ending cash actually then went down the 950,000. And so you end up with a smaller deficit once you exclude the one-times, and then you have smaller ending cash number revised at only 2 million versus 3 million going into at the end of 18, looking to go into 19. And so a little bit more about that ending fund balance, looking at that, kind of saying, well, what does that include then as we go into 19? So we have 2 million as our estimated. Again, this will change based on what we end up doing for revenue estimates for year end this year and expenditure estimates for year end this year. But right now, it's an estimated just over 2 million. So the one-time adjustments not from cash. So it's a little, I know this is probably a little mental math in and out, but so that 2 million is the bottom line. That includes all those expenditures we've already talked about, and in those expenditures are all the one-time things. And so they didn't get funded from the cash, they were funded from savings in the budget. So we'll save from this line item and pay it here and net those out. So we don't want the cash to be impacted by those, so we'll kind of add those back in. The solid waste prepayment set aside, take that out because that needs to be set aside from that cash. We need to make sure that's set aside for next year. The reserves based on expenditures. So we have, this still is including the strategic reserve as well as the working capital. And we're going to talk about separating those out into 19 so that we can see both of those. For the sake, I can just combine them together at this point. That's 1.4 million, and that's again on the revised expenditures. I based it off of those. And then the Transportation Benefit District balance, almost 1.2 million when we look at the actuals for 16-17 and the expected kind of budgeted amount for 18 and the use of the 120 for that capital project gets us a net of that. So that actually puts us then at negative fund balance. So the one-time adjustments above from net of cash was only accounting for the savings that were that was the total of the adjustments, and so using cash or the savings just to offset those. There's more savings in the line items than we need for the one-time adjustments. So that is the addition of the 191. So we still have more savings that if we don't spend that, it's going to add to your bottom line come the end of the year. So that would put us kind of net around 123,000. So it funds the solid waste prepayment sufficiently. It funds our reserves sufficiently. It funds the Transportation Benefit District balance sufficiently, but it does leave a small margin then of unencumbered ending fund balance moving into 2019 that the council has to work with. And this is going to change. We hope that it would go up. We hope our revenue will come in greater than revenue, and obviously we will plan to try and spend under our budget, and both of those combinations of things would then add to our estimated ending fund balance to move into 2019. But we are starting at least from a positive ending fund balance moving forward.
Sandy, you were going to discuss some more about the reserves or what they are, because I think generally that's not been shown in the past, although it's been city policy for many years.
Yes, and we can put some additional information for the information for the next week. So the 1.4 million is about half and half. So our strategic reserve is 6.375% of the general fund expenditures. And then the working capital kind of cash flow reserve that the general fund needs to have, because expenditures go out every month. The revenue comes in, especially like property tax, and 2 big hits in the year, so you don't have an even stream of revenue. So you got to have cash flow. That cash flow is 6.5%. So they're almost the same percentages. So that 1.4 is about split in half between the two, a little bit higher on the working capital side than the strategic reserve.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
Any questions?
Council, have any questions? And attached to what we provided you tonight, and if the board has any to look, so we had included in the original council packet the total list of adjustments and then the general fund list of adjustments. There had been some changes made since the council packet got put together, and so we just wanted to provide you an updated one. All of the numbers in the presentation tonight are based on this attached to documents and these final numbers.
Okay.
So we're just
Okay.
asking council to put this ordinance onto the action agenda for the next council meeting.
Okay. Any comments, questions for these guys?
I appreciate the hard work.
Absolutely.
It's somewhat agonizing going back through, 2 or 3 years technically. You had to go back through, and while the outlook wasn't originally as bleak, it's still, not ideal, but look forward to our budget retreat and all of us putting in some effort to glide into our next fiscal year on the right foot, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
First reading.
Thank you for your hard work.
First reading of the ordinance.
Okay, could I have the first reading ordinance number 19270818?
Ordinance number 1927-0818, an ordinance of the City of Shelton, Washington, amending the annual budget for the year ending December 31st, 2018.
Okay, consensus to move that action item next week?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Terry and Sandy. Okay, next, Economic Development Officer Andy Arnaz is here to present a resolution having to do with the 2019 legislative agenda. Andy?
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. As we discussed last week, this is a resolution to adopt and formalize the 2019 legislative agenda. The only adjustment that's been made, I'll just point your attention to this first item under infrastructure. The capital funding request is just to make a specific note of the traffic signaling improvements on Wallaston Boulevard in front of the Open Bay Junior High, as noted by the council last week. Unless there's any other questions or discussion, I just ask that you approve this so we can move forward.
Questions, comments? Okay, I should ask for public, did we have a public comment on the budget revision? I failed to ask. Okay, any public comment on this?
No.
No, okay, thank you, Donna. Could I have resolution 11350818 read, please?
Resolution number 1135-0818, a resolution of the City of Shelton, Washington, establishing the 2019 legislative agenda.
Any further comments or questions? Okay, do we have a motion?
I move to adopt resolution number 1135-0818, a resolution of the City of Shelton establishing the 2019 legislative agenda.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to adopt resolution 11350818. Those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Motion passes. Next, Director Mark Ziegler is going to talk to us about Civic Center Rotating Art Gallery.
Right. Thank you, Mayor, council members. Bringing to you today the recommendations from the Shelton Arts Commission for 3 artists with 9 total pieces to be placed in the Civic Center Rotating Art Gallery. The Shelton Arts Commission met on July 31st to jury these submittals, and with your approval tonight, they will meet on September 4th to install for the next 30 days to the end of November, and you will see new art quickly thereafter, or I guess just before the 30th, so we can have the next rotation up in December.
Okay, thank you. Public comment?
No.
Okay. Comments, questions from the council?
Looks good.
Do we have a motion?
Do we need consensus, don't we?
It's
We need a motion?
It's action.
motion. We need a
Action
motion.
agenda.
Yep.
Mark, do you want to make a motion?
I moved to-
Mark's
I move to move forward with the art pieces that the Art Commission has chosen.
Second.
We have a
Couldn't find it.
motion that's been seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? No. Motion passes. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, next, back to Public Works Director Craig Ree, information on a contract change with Aspect Consulting.
Thank you, Mayor, council members again. This is something that we discussed about a month ago when we brought this forward, and it is really just a house cleaning issue, changing the expiration date of this contract, moving it out 1 year. And just one thing of clarification for you, we have not done any work on this project since the last update that we gave you quite some time ago. We have been waiting for additional funding from Department of Ecology. We have been working with them very diligently and actually had a conference call with them today. And we are going to schedule to go over and meet again with them likely next week to discuss additional funding moving forward. So likely this will have to be amended again, pushing it out another year. So we are continuing to work on this, and we will be bringing back a more complete report. But at this point, we would really like to just extend the contract to continue to move forward. We do have some funding still available to us without the additional funding that could be available from Department of Ecology. So depending on whether that goes through or not, we will certainly be back to the council, asking the council whether they would like to continue to move forward, whether we get funding or not for this project.
Okay. And public comment?
Yes, we have a public comment from Patricia Vanden.
I have a question. I believe the last time this was brought up, there was some comment made about alternate processes rather than what was originally set up on this, changing what was going to be done.
Make your comments, and we'll ask staff to address that.
Okay, because was part of a lawsuit from a group here, and I don't, if there was a change on that, I was wondering if, was the people involved in that advised that you were considering a different way of handling it, rather than what was originally set up?
Patricia, we'll bring that issue up with staff, but if you would like to provide comments, that'd be great.
Well, I'd like to know, yeah.
We'll,
Is this a change from what was said before, that they were considering an alternate way of doing the cleanup rather than what was originally arranged?
I think we'll bring that question to staff, and I know staff's in the room, but we'll bring that question to staff, and we'll address that.
Okay, so you mean not right now, though?
Not right now.
Okay, well, that's mainly what, I do want to say that that is a terribly, terribly contaminated area. And we have Simpson to thank for that, as we do Shelton Harbor, because it was all the ash that they produced in their plant before they had a high level in the boilers that they had. And when they were bringing in these salt-laden logs, they burned them after they dried them out. And if it's under a certain temperature, it produces dioxin. And not just any dioxin, but 2378 TCDD, the most toxic form. It was one of the ingredients in Agent Orange during the Vietnam War. And there was a study done in May 8th of, March. No, not May 8th. Can't think what year it was. Anyhow, where Herrera came in and they did a survey and a study all around the plant and the area, because they dumped that stuff everywhere. It didn't make any difference. They just took it, particularly up on Shelton Hills. They brought it up there and dumped it everywhere. So anyhow, they did a study on it, and they went in and did readings on the ash itself. They got permission from Simpson to do that. And the maximum contaminant level for that particular dioxin is only 3 to 11 parts per trillion. And they got readings of 4,200 parts per trillion. And this is the stuff that they were dumping everywhere. So that is very, very contaminated up there. Not only that, but they never covered it up. They just dumped it and left it that way. So we have Simpson and Rainier responsible for that mess up there. And if it's a matter of money, I don't know why the city doesn't go after them to pay for that cleanup. They are the party of the disaster at Shelton Harbor. It's already been determined that it is Simpson. And they have been playing around. This is something that I think the city should be aware of too, is that they originally wanted to do a partial cleanup of it, and they were just going to bring in fill and just cover parts, areas of it. Well, there was a study done by the Department of Ecology that came out and said that sediment in water reacts differently than sediment on land. It tends to move about. So if you just covered up a partial area, there's no guarantee that it's going to stay covered. So then they decided, well, maybe we'll try something else. So then they requested a permit for cement, but they never went into how they were going to use it in there. That apparently didn't make it around. So now they've got another program going where they're going to take some property, I guess they owned, and turn it from a forest, they call it forest borough, to a commercial, what do you want to call it?
Mayor, the time has exceeded.
Okay, anyhow, to take that over there and try and cover it up partially again. So what I'm saying is these things always seem to be passed over. They never are held accountable, and we're left with the remnant of it, which is really very, very bad.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Patricia. Anybody else? Donna? Okay. Right. Okay. Comments, questions from council on the Aspect contract? Okay, do we have a motion?
When you're reading, nothing like that. I move to approve the contract extension and additional expenditures by authorizing the mayor to sign a contract change order with number 4 with Aspect Consulting.
Is there a second? Okay, there's a motion to approve the modification with the contract with Aspect. Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, next we're on to Director Gregory has information about a design contract for construction of a reclaimed water tank.
Again, something that we talked about several weeks ago, the start of design for the satellite wastewater treatment reclaimed water tank. Right now, it is a fairly small tank. I think we've discussed this at length already with Washington State Patrol using a very large volume. It is difficult for us to store enough reclaimed water for any other users. So an additional larger tank would certainly give us the capacity to store additional reclaimed water for use by other users. And this is to start design of the overall project, and it was budgeted in the 2018 budget.
Okay. Any public comments, Donna? Okay, questions, comments from council?
Will the 1.5 mil cover the cost of the design and construction? Is that what that says?
It is a preliminary number.
Approximate.
Until we get an engineer's estimate, which will come with the 10% design. That was a guess by staff. We have some previous projects to compare to, so I think it is a fairly close number. But we do have some, I guess, nuances to that it is an in-ground tank instead of an elevated tank. We did do some comparisons, but they were fairly old to the in-ground tanks that we have down at the wastewater treatment plant. So we did try to take our best guess at that, but until we get a 10% design and an engineer's estimate, we are really guessing at this point of what that overall cost looks like. We certainly are not talking about moving forward with a project until we go to either Ecology, Department of Health, some assistance from maybe Commerce to offset some of this cost. So we will start, as soon as we get a 10% design, we certainly will start pursuing grant funding to help out with the overall cost of this.
Now, we have, if I'm not mistaken, we have reclaimed water lines run out to the prison, is that correct?
That is correct, all the way to the prison's doorstep.
Right, to their second entrance, I believe, and they just
Yes.
have to bring it in. Are they ready? Have you had any conversations with them?
I have had conversations with them recently, within the last, about the last quarter.
Yeah.
And they have requested funding to extend that line into their facility. So it is fairly important that if we do get another large user, that we certainly can accommodate
Right.
and have the capacity to have them utilize that.
Because they
So
will
that-
want it sooner or later.
Yes, that is true. And it really helps us in many different aspects. It cuts down on the overall water use that we're pulling out of the actual aquifers.
Right.
And certainly helps us in our partnership with the Squaxin Island and Skokomish tribes as far as using reclaimed water and recharging the headwaters up in that area, and not utilizing potable water, but reusing reclaimed water. So, yeah, a lot of benefits to this project, certainly.
And Craig, is it fair to say that the purpose of moving forward with the design is to allow staff to explore opportunities for funding this project's construction?
Absolutely. As we have with all of our other projects, until we get a 10% design and a cost estimate, we don't have the ability to go out and pursue any funding until we get to that point. So that is, at this point, what the concept is. Let's get to that 10% design, and then we'll go and start knocking down everybody's door and see if we can't get some more grant funding to fund a project like this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But do you have a guesstimate on how much revenue we would generate from the prison alone? It's gotta be fairly substantial, I would think.
I don't know that it is a large number, because we would have a reduction in overall water consumption, potable water consumption. But certainly looking at the overall, the broad picture of the comparison between using reclaimed water or potable water, we certainly are doing the right thing environmentally by
Correct.
switching them over and getting them to use reclaimed water. But as far as a revenue source, I'm not sure that there is a large change. It would be a change in
Yeah, it's kind of a
the
concept.
funds. It wouldn't be
Yeah.
as much revenue into the water department. It would be more revenue into the sewer department.
Yeah,
So,
but the fact that we're using reclaimed water for their gardens, their grounds, their toilets, fire suppression
certainly,
would be the right thing to do.
yes, definitely.
And we would be processing all of that from our wastewater treatment plant, and theoretically, would see an uptick in, correct, for processing the reclaimed water to provide that out.
We process all of the correction center's waste now and turn it into reclaim. The problem that we have right now is with the small capacity of the tank we have now, it goes right back out to across the street from the correction center and goes into a spray field and basically waters the forest out there. So really, we're just wasting whatever is coming into the plant. This would give us the ability to retain that and hold on to it for future users. But right now, most of that is just wasted.
And currently, because we do not have the capacity and we're supplementing that, they're still paying the lower water rate,
That is correct.
although we're utilizing our potable water rather than reclaimed. Is that
So to expand on that just a little bit, so when we do run out of reclaimed water, which we do when Washington State Patrol floods their test track, we end up supplementing that with potable water, which then they pay the same rate for the reclaimed water as they do for what we are supplementing as potable water. So you are correct. So it is a problem, and the sewer fund actually ends up paying for that and paying the water department of the city of Shelton for that water that they are using to put out into toilets, sprinkler systems, irrigation, those sorts of things. So, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Do we have a motion?
I move to approve the satellite reclaim tank design services contract and authorize the mayor to sign the agreement with Gray and Osborne, Inc. once it is returned to the city for final execution.
Second.
Second. We have a motion that's been seconded to, contract for design of the construction of a new claimed water tank. Everyone in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Next is Well One Rehab Project.
And
Director
again,
Gregory.
another 10% design to look for future funding for a project. This is much needed and has been identified by Department of Health as a priority project for the city of Shelton. It is an open-air gravity line that comes out of Well One and feeds the high school tank. It is a fairly secure line at this point, but we really need to take a look at this in the future. It is an aging line that, like I said, is open air, so it is something that we would like to pursue funding for in the future. And as Deputy Mayor Peterson pointed out, it is a requirement for us to go look for funding to have that engineer's estimate and that 10% design. And it also was budgeted in the 2018 budget and came in under budget for the 10% design.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Public comment?
There are no public.
Okay, questions, comments from council? Okay, do we have a motion?
I move to approve the Well One Rehab Project Design Services Contract and authorize the mayor to sign the agreement with Gray and Osborne Incorporated once it is returned to the city for final execution.
Second? Do we have a second. I'll have a motion to approve the Well One Rehab Project Design Services Contract. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, next, back to Director Gregory, information about vacation of Goey Drive and Mountain View.
So Mayor and council members, this has been a very long process and a very rigorous negotiation with Mason General Hospital, myself, City Manager Vicki Look, Mark Ziegler have all been involved in this. We have met with Mason General Hospital on several occasions. We have bounced, I think, every idea that we have had, they have had to get this project designed to the best of everybody's ability. And at this point, staff feels not only in Public Works, but also in planning and community development that vacating these streets would make a better project for Mason General Hospital. And at the end of the day, what we came up with was the full estimated value of that property. They did do a assessment of that property to come up with a value, and that did come in at $140,000. And since the right-of-way was acquired more than 25 years ago, it is an option for the city council to require full payment of the value of that property. If it were less than 25 years old, it is only a 50% valuation of that. So if the council decides to move forward with the vacation of this property or of this right-of-way, Mason County or Mason General Hospital, excuse me, has agreed to pay that full valuation of $140,000 if the council decides to move forward with the vacation of this particular right-of-way.
Public comment?
No, there's no public comment.
Thanks, Donna. Comments, questions from council?
Person by reading first.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm sorry, Mayor, one thing to point out here, we are asking for just a first and final reading. We certainly, that is just setting the public meeting. So further discussion, we're certainly not trying to just push this through. We are going to have further discussion. It's really just setting the future public hearing for the vacation.
Okay. Donna?
Could I just make?
Following the reading.
Let me read.
Oh.
Following the
Donna,
reading.
could you read that? resolution number 11360818. I screwed up.
I didn't know. I don't know what we're doing.
Resolution number 1136-0818. A resolution of the City of Shelton, Washington, initiating procedures to vacate Gobi Drive and Mountain View Drive.
Now, Councilmember Crowns.
Okay. I just want to say that the older I get, the more I'm in favor of hospitals. So I think it's a good thing that the city work this situation out and that we come up with an agreement that we can all live with, because I am a supporter of our local hospital.
Any other council comments, questions?
I use that road all the time. My wife works over in that area, and I see a lot of close calls already, you know, from pedestrians walking. It's almost always employees walking to the hospital or to Shelton Family Medicine or wherever. And I would be glad to learn to drive around.
Okay.
That is one thing that I guess I failed to mention. I don't know if everybody is aware of the design aspects and what they're trying to do with that area, but they are trying to vacate that roadway and turn it more into a parking lot. It still would be an entrance exit into that parking lot. So sorry if I failed to mention what the project actually looked like, but it is a parking lot, going back to Councilmember Dorsey's comments. There is a lot of pedestrian traffic, no crosswalks up in that area, so everybody just kind of darts across the road. So sorry if I left that portion out.
Okay. Any questions, comments? All right.
Sorry, this,
Go ahead, Joe.
this is vacating all of Mountain View Drive?
Mountain View Drive extends from
13th to
13th
Sherwood?
up to Sherwood, and then you would also, that spur leg of Govey, which extends from Mountain View Drive out to K Street, which really is basically the entrance to the middle school. So it's that entire T section.
So traffic Sherwood traffic will divert to K.
Correct,
Go
to the,
signal
through the
on
traffic
intersection
signal.
On 13th.
Correct.
They are also, the way I understand it, they're going to be adding more parking in that area as
Yes.
well.
That
Oh.
entire vacant lot between
Right.
K Street and Mountain View Drive all would become a parking lot area.
Basin General owns that vacant lot.
Yes, they do.
Is
They
that-
own all the abutting properties.
Is that increase in parking congruent with our urban planning?
Yes, they meet our code and parking code, and this is all tied to the medical office building proposal, which they have submitted for expansion, so it is directly tied to their parking requirements, particularly for their staff, that the existing parking on the south side of the building would be for customers, if you will, of the hospital.
And that's correct, because they're not selling off the facilities on the professional way side, so we're Shelton Family, and on the other side of 13th.
Correct.
So they're holding on to that property for now.
The indication at this point is, yes, they would hold on to that, but that services are primarily, most of the services would move over to the new medical office building at some point.
They've talked about those buildings being transferred into basically storage at this point.
Gotcha.
And that is another point to bring up. This is in addition to their traffic impact fees that they still will be paying also for that expansion.
Okay.
Is that general fund money coming in, the 140?
The 140 within the vacation policy actually becomes, in the general fund, transportation dollars. So that would be used for a project, whether it be a larger project or residential paving, something of that sort.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I move to adopt resolution number 1136-0818, a resolution initiating procedures to vacate Gobi Drive and Mountain View Drive, and setting the public hearing for this matter for Tuesday, September 18th, 2018.
Second. We have a motion to accept resolution number 11360818. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes. Okay, next up, Chief Moody has an administration report for us.
Mayor and Council, I was hoping to come to you this week or this month with a contract from the school district for the new school resource officers that we've been discussing for the last several months. Unfortunately, due to circumstances out of my control, the district didn't come forward with a contract until today, and school starts next Wednesday. So we're on a time crunch. What I got today was a notification from Alex Apostle. I think you all have copies of it, basically, which says it was adopted of the addition of 2 school resource officers in the 18-19 year, which starts next week. Unfortunately, I don't have 2 school resource officers to give him next week. I couldn't hire ahead of this on the guarantee. We will make accommodations. We will have officers at the schools. They won't be the permanent school resource officers. Alex and I have talked about this. And in fact, we have a meeting Thursday to discuss how we move forward. We don't even have a signed contract with them, but it's adopted into their budget. And based on our working relationship with the school district and the safety of the students, I'm going to take them at their word. And we're going to continue moving forward with the school resource officer program and bring back to you at a later date the exact contract. But the agreement was they currently pay for 1/2 of a school resource officer. This will add 2 more to that. So they would be paying 2.5 for 3 officers. That cost includes their salary and benefits. It doesn't just include their salary. It's salary and benefits, with us agreeing to take on the burden of equipment, vehicles, maintenance of the vehicles, fuel cost. That we estimated it somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000 a month. So frankly, I think it's a pretty good bargain to get 2 officers for about that cost. But that's where we're at tonight. I just wanted to make sure you understood what was going on, that you had a full briefing on it, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about it.
And Chief, the city will continue to train those officers as well, and that expense is taken on by the department. Is that correct?
There may come later times, because what we've asked is they integrate the officers into the staff of the schools. There may be trainings for the school district that are burdened by the school district. So it'll be an intermingling of this, and frankly, a learning process as we move forward with it.
Do you have any idea when their final budget adoption is going to be?
Well, their budget cycle started in July. Like I said, my understanding is the board has given Alex the okay and said it's in the budget. The problem that they faced, my understanding of the problem they faced, one of them is they were in negotiations with several of the unions all summer. And so that always affects how the budget falls, and they had to get those contracts in place before everything was finalized. But I may have more information after Thursday. I'll be sitting down with them Thursday. But like I said, we wanted to get this information to you this week. The school does start next week.
Thank you.
So we got to ramp it up a little. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
I would just comment that this is something when a lot of tragedies kind of happened here, lately in schools and stuff. This is something you kind of took on personally, and you really worked it through the system. And that is, I think you did a great job in communicating with the schools and filling a need there and working it so that it was even financially beneficial for the city, kind of like. And so I think you worked outside the box on this, and I think you deserve credit for the work that you and Dr. Apostle did to do this. So.
Thank you very much. And on a side note to that, the reason I'm taking them at their word is we did last year, in a 2-week period, we were able to bring together the 2 teams and work overtime at the schools, and they paid that bill without question when it came for 2.5 months of overtime at the schools. So we're both committed to working through this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, next is Interim City Manager Vicki Luck.
Thank you, Council. I just wanted to comment that Craig got back from vacation on Monday and hit the ground running with all of the agenda items that he had on tonight. So good job, Craig.
Thanks.
We've been really busy preparing for the budget. As you can see, you just adopted next week we'll hopefully adopt the 2018 amended budget. And we're starting to work on 2019. So the staff's getting together, looking at that budget, trying to decide if there are some things that, we can change or make recommendations to the council on ways to save some funding and those sorts of things. So we'll be working on that in the next week and being prepared to discuss those items with the council on the 31st. So it's exciting. We're moving on and, you know, things are starting to come all together, it seems like. So we're pretty excited about that. We also will be doing some interviews for at least 2 of the positions that we had open, and that is for the assistant city manager and also the HR director. We'll be doing that next week. So really hoping to get those positions filled rather quickly, and so that we can fill some gaps that we've been struggling to keep all the balls in the air. So that's pretty much the report from me tonight.
Okay, thank you. Questions for Vicki?
We should give her the gavel. This is her last meeting.
Oh.
Should end it.
Now, she asked us not to make a fuss, Eric.
All right.
Yes.
Agenda's complete. We are adjourned. Next meeting is September 4th, 6 PM.
I could be crazy. It would.